Hey, Patrick, thanks for joining me today on Sustainability Square One, where we have conversations with leaders in sustainability. So, of course, my first question for you is the origin story. How did you get started? And you and I share some MIT background, so I'd love to hear how that fits into the picture as well.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I studied mechanical engineering undergrad and then moved back to New York City. I grew up outside of New York. And if you combine what's happening in New York with mechanical engineering, you get building design. I started out as an HVAC engineer right around the time that green buildings and LEED certification was all taking off. And I got drawn into sustainability really as a puzzle to solve, this big industry with engineering decisions that are going to last and have implications for 50 years, 100 years. Why are we not taking the long-term view? So that's how I made my way in initially, to solve it as a puzzle, a big high stakes puzzle. And then I went to work for a clean tech venture capital firm, investing in green building and energy efficiency, but also solar and wind, which was a great learning experience. But that led me to want to be in an operational role rather than investing from the sidelines. Especially in my 20s, I wanted to be in the action a little bit more directly. And so that was back to business school at MIT. I got the sustainability certificate, and I really just approached that wanting to gather as many tools into my toolbox as possible to be an effective leader inside of companies. And then coming out of that, it was my only career goal is maximum impact on climate change. And how to do that is a little bit tricky, but it's a really nice, stable North Star for the career that's not going anywhere anytime soon. The next step was to lead sustainability for a data center company.
Mhm.
It was in retrospect, a fantastic place to learn the art and science of changing companies from within, because a lot of the economic incentives and the environmental incentives were really well lined up. I ended up speaking a lot like a finance person rather than an environmentalist, because energy efficiency, higher utilization, clean energy, and storage, all of those things made good financial sense for the company. So I got a lot of reps and a lot of yeses from that platform. And then landed the job leading sustainability at Salesforce. There, in addition to the financial wind at the back, was also cultural wind at the back. The company was founded from day one, from the top down, on a mission to show that business is the greatest platform for change. And so I'd meet all sorts of different executives and peers in the company, and they'd have a willingness and an inclination to take action on sustainability. I love that experience. And then a couple of years ago, it was time for me to move on and find something else to accelerate. And that's what brings us to today and to Switchboard, which I'm excited to talk about.
Cool. You're pointed out this convergence, which I'm seeing over and over, and particularly at data centers, energy markets, water markets, and sustainability reporting and finance. And
Mm.
that was my big takeaway from Climate Week, which is there's so much money in that convergence right now. So
Mhm.
is your next thing also about that convergence?
Absolutely. It's all about the power that businesses have in shaping our future. And one of the things we need in order to move fast enough on climate change is groups of businesses in pre-competitive moments coming together to call for a change or to create a demand signal up their supply chain. And if you want to move groups of businesses, on climate, it makes sense to have a good relationship with the head of climate, the head of sustainability in those businesses. And from over a decade in this field, I've got a lot of those relationships. I know what the leaders are going through. And so what Switchboard aims to do is to connect them more often to one another so they can help each other, and also connect them to the big high stakes moments that make great commercial sense, that can move industry forward, but in particular, that have a clear call to action with high stakes acceleration for climate.
So what would be have you had a success from Switchboard that you could describe so we can crystallize it into it starts here and it ends here?
Sure. One relevant to the data center industry and to electricity, clean energy generation is there was an important rule at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission about early 2024. There was a vote that would be able to establish a more streamlined, more holistic, and more consistent way for permitting and transmission access across all 50 states. And I was able to learn about it, distill it down to a 2-minute quick pitch video and send it out to a bunch of companies, and drum up a lot more support from the business sector for the right decision in that moment. And it ended up getting the vote that we were hoping for. And now I did one for the US election, trying to show how in a nonpartisan way, company leaders can weigh in and get out the vote or encourage their green teams to get out the vote for the environment. And the one that's ahead that I'm quite interested in is there's a international plastics treaty negotiation coming up at the end of November. Over 250 companies already signed on, calling for an ambitious outcome. And if we can gather some more into that sign-on effort, then we just might change the odds of a very successful negotiation in South Korea at the end of November.
That's pretty amazing. I've been watching what's shown on Bloomberg terminals about companies. So they have their financial data. Now they have their levels of carbon and levels of water use and energy. And then what are they planning to do for reductions? And those two should fit together nicely. Then they have their physical risk, like, what hurricanes, what tornado risk, and so on at every location for their assets. And then finally, what we saw Bloomberg add like 2.5 weeks ago is an environmental thread, because everybody's realizing this open-ended liability. So you say plastics, and I'm hearing from companies like in the auto supply chain, these are toxins that get into the recycling chains if we're not careful, and it comes back to us, gets into our soil for crops and so on. So plastics is not just like, oh, it's floating in the ocean. We're suddenly realizing plastics is everywhere.
Right.
The financial markets are looking for the data to turn that it's out there into what's my risk exposure monetarily. It's all converging rather rapidly. How do you stay up and how do you pick your issues?
Yeah, well, I'll add that in addition to all the reasons we care about plastics and getting a global rule book in place for companies to take action, what I was fascinated to learn is the plastics industry's annual emissions are 4 times greater than those of the aviation industry every year. So it's also very much directly related to climate. What I look for are these high stakes moments, a lot of climate action or lack of climate action hanging in the balance, with a very specific call to action, something clear and time bound. Hopefully, a bunch of companies already engaged, sort of some anchor supporters already in place who have vetted it really well, and then try to bring other companies into the picture in moments when that business voice can really change the outcome, or at least the odds of the outcome. And so that's how I scan the world right now. And there are a lot of these moments. It's actually, there's not a shortage of interesting new calls to action out there. It's mostly about keeping the bar really high and looking for those high stakes moments.
The ones we can have near-term impact as well. Yeah. So you have been the head of sustainability for Salesforce, which meant 2 things. One is they reported it. It was on you to get it right and get all the carbon credits right and so on. And Salesforce is also walking the talk. They turned their own efforts into a product, Net Zero Cloud. Most companies don't take it to that second step. But when you have, walked in those shoes, and this video series is for sustainability managers who are in those first set of shoes, what do you think you would give them as pieces of advice? They're not going to be probably a Fortune 50 company like Salesforce, a little bit lower down in size, but what would be the 3 things you might want to advise them on? And how do you put Switchboard activities into their toolkit?
Great question. The first piece of advice would be to think about superpowers. I think what the planet needs, given the urgency at hand, Is everyone doing what they do best, what your superpowers are, what mine are for climate? Artists making art, lawyers making contracts, so and so forth. But it also is true at the organizational level. What can your business do that can really move things forward that's within your company's superpower? And that was a lot of the mindset behind getting net zero cloud commercialized. Salesforce's superpower is helping all of its customers with digital tools to bring data to a higher quality, to understand customers better. And so for us to do that for climate action on behalf of all of our customers was really a high leverage activity to undertake. So that's number one, thinking about superpowers at the individual and organizational level. Number two, somewhat related, is we need big, fast change. And so even if it's a pilot project or something small, and certainly every journey begins with the first step, have a way to think about what your impact is doing that can get bigger faster. So if we show the way forward in this particular way, this project, then how do we get that to be replicated and maybe set a precedent and accelerate things that are far bigger than just the four walls of your company or your own value chain? And then I guess finally is related to your work. I think environmental data will inevitably reach the same sort of quality and processes and levels of disclosure and channels of disclosure as financial data. And so you can always look at how things are done in the financial side of the business and marry that up with how you're thinking about environmental data, environmental forecasting, environmental strategy, risk. And that's a nice way to know how best to integrate all of that work throughout the business in a way that's going to end up being the best practice for all companies across the board.
So my summary is superpower snowballing, and I can't find my S, so I'm going to call the last one, watch the financials and learn.
Yeah.
Watch and learn from financials. Thank you, Patrick. This has been terrific. And that concludes our Sustainability Square One interview.
Thank you.
Cheers. Hey, thanks for tuning in to Sustainability Square One. If today's insights sparked ideas, share the episode and subscribe for more conversations with sustainability leaders committed to transparency and impact.